Viewer discretion. Strongly advised, the following is for educational and entertainment purposes only. This account chronicles Day 14 of the Shaun Diddy Combs trial, as reported by Inner City Press, a day that would etch itself into the annals of legal and cultural history. The courtroom, a cavernous space of polished wood and stern faces, was still reeling from the shock of Brad Pitt's raw testimony the day before. Whispers of his words lingered in the air, a mix of disbelief and curiosity, when the judge, a figure of quiet authority in his black robe, cleared his throat and called the next name. Heads swiveled, a collective gasp rippled through the gallery, and a hush fell like a curtain. TomCruise, global movie star, the embodiment of Hollywood charisma, the face of high-octane action films, strode into the courtroom. This was no scripted cameo, no promotional stunt for a blockbuster. Cruise took the stand not as Ethan Hunt, not as Maverick, but as a man stripped bare, a survivor confronting a shadow that he claimed had loomed over him for nearly 2 decades. What he unveiled? Secret basement baths, cryptic rituals, a circle of control involving Diddy, Tom Hanks, Jim Carrey, Steve Harvey, and others unnamed, plunged the room into a realm darker than any film. This wasn't testimony. It was an unmasking, a peeling back of layers to reveal a hidden truth. The tension was palpable, a thick electric charge that seemed to hum through the benches. The judge adjusted his robe, his fingers deliberate, and leaned toward the microphone, his voice steady yet carrying the weight of the moment. A murmur, soft as wind through autumn leaves, swept through the gallery. "All rise for the next witness," the bailiff announced, his tone crisp in the stillness. Then he appeared. TomCruise, clad in a dark navy suit, no tie, no trace of a smile. His posture was rigid, his face a mask of resolve, eyes shadowed with a gravity rarely seen in his public life. Even those jaded by the trial's parade of revelations felt the temperature drop. A woman in the second row gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. A juror, a middle-aged man with wire-rimmed glasses, clutched his notebook as if it were a lifeline. Cruise raised his right hand, swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and settled into the witness stand. When he spoke, his voice was calm, measured, a stark contrast to the charismatic energy of red carpets and talk shows. This was raw, unfiltered. "I came here today," he began, his gaze steady, "not to be a headline, not to chase fame, but to say what I should have said years ago. Words I buried out of fear, shame, and a hope it would all fade." He traced the origin of his connection with Shaun Diddy Combs to a glittering night in 2004, a party in Cannes where the air buzzed with celebrity and champagne. It began innocently, a handshake, a smile, Diddy introducing himself as a fan, framing it as a business opportunity. "He admired my control over my public image," Cruise recalled, "said we could learn from each other, build something together." They met again in Los Angeles, a casual dinner amid the city's glow, then in Miami, where the ocean breeze masked a shifting tone. At first it felt like networking, 2 titans of their crafts exchanging ideas. But Cruise noted a strange energy creeping in. Diddy steered conversations away from music or film, away from art or deals, toward private gatherings, exclusive events with vague promises. "It wasn't business, wasn't creative, it was something else," Cruise said, his brow furrowing. Then came the pivotal invitation. A weekend retreat at Diddy's sprawling Los Angeles mansion. "It's for select people only," Diddy had told him, voice low, reassuring. "You'll be safe. What happens there never leaves the room." Cruise's tone slowed, each word heavy. "I accepted. Curious. Naive. That was the beginning of something I couldn't comprehend then. Something I now see was carefully engineered." He paused, his eyes flicking across the courtroom, meeting Diddy's gaze for the first time. The air seemed to thicken, the jury leaning forward, the prosecutor's pen poised. "What I saw in that house, what I became part of, without full consent, altered me," Cruise said. "It's time I told the truth." The judge nodded, a silent cue to proceed. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman in a gray suit, leaned in, her focus laser-like. The jury sat locked in, faces a mix of shock and anticipation. Cruise drew a deep breath, his chest rising, and spoke. "It started in the basement," he said, "and it started with a bath." His voice remained steady, but the courtroom felt the shift, a weight settling over every listener. "It wasn't just a basement," Cruise explained. "It was a hidden sanctum, accessed through a thick mahogany door concealed behind a sliding bookshelf in Diddy's mansion. 2 security guards, stone-faced and silent, flanked the entrance, their presence imposing. Cruise was instructed to remove his shoes, a simple act that felt oddly ceremonial, and descend a narrow staircase, lit only by dim wall sconces that cast flickering shadows. "You could hear the water before you saw it," he recalled, his voice low, vivid, a faint drip, a steady rhythm, echoing in the dark. At the bottom, the room unfolded, cold, cavernous, tiled in black and green marble, its air thick with steam. In the center stood a massive tub, large enough for 6, perhaps 8 people, steaming gently under a soft blue light that gave it an otherworldly glow. The size was striking, but the silence chilled him most. "No one spoke," he said. "Not a word, not a whisper. And the people in that room, you'd recognize them." He paused, his jaw tightening. "I saw Tom Hanks, Jim Carrey, Steve Harvey, and others I won't name yet, not until I'm ready." Diddy appeared, barefoot in a silk robe, his demeanor calm yet commanding, holding a small ceramic bowl filled with bath salts that glinted in the light. He approached each guest, handing them a black towel, soft and heavy, and whispered a phrase Cruise etched into memory: "Leave what burdens you in the water." At first, Cruise thought it was poetic, a metaphor for release. But as the ritual began, he realized no one was leaving. We sat there, naked, silent. The only sounds were the drip of water, the hum of hidden speakers playing ambient tones, the occasional shift of a body in the tub. Participants were told to close their eyes, to let the energy align, to surrender to the moment. A man, a stranger Cruise couldn't identify, circled the room, lighting thick herbal incense that burned with a heavy, disorienting scent. "Time stopped," Cruise said. "I felt dizzy, unmoored. It wasn't sexual, not overtly, but it was something deeper. Submission, a stripping of identity, a loss of self." When it ended, Diddy approached again, his eyes piercing. "You're part of it now," he said. "Now you understand." Cruise felt a chill, a sense that his life had tilted, and not toward light. The courtroom was still absorbing the vivid scene when Cruise leaned closer to the microphone, his next words stunning. "All that experience," he said, "is the real reason I turned to Scientology." Gasps murmured through the gallery. Even the judge's eyebrows lifted, a rare crack in his composure. Cruise pressed on, unwavering. "The public thinks I joined for spiritual yearning, or Hollywood's influence. That's half the story. The truth is, I needed protection, not from the press, not from fans, from him." He pointed at Diddy, the gesture sharp, deliberate. "After that night I saw I was being pulled into something, a pattern, a lifestyle, a system designed to trap me." Diddy's calls came frequently after, not about music or business, but vague pleas for emotional release, or to rebalance the energy. He'd say, "Don't go chasing fake power when you've bathed in the real thing." Cruise shook his head. "I didn't know what it meant then, and I still struggle to. But when I tried to pull away, things turned strange. Rumors, baseless and biting, flooded tabloids. Personal assistants quit without notice, leaving no trace. Packages arrived at his home, scented oils, tiny vials of murky bathwater, cryptic. Notes reading, still soaked in silence. It wasn't just weird," Cruise said. "It was targeted, surveillance, and control." By 2005, the pressure mounted, and Cruise sought refuge. "I reached out to a high-ranking official in the Church of Scientology," he said. "I told them I needed a wall, a barrier. They didn't ask who. They just said, 'We understand.'" Internal documents, he revealed, showed he fast-tracked through Scientology's ranks, seeking audit protection, a shield against the unseen. "I wasn't just looking for Spiritual guidance, he admitted. I was hiding. Scientology offered secrecy, shielding, a place Diddy couldn't reach. The courtroom sat in stunned silence, the weight of his words sinking in. I joined Scientology to escape Shaun. Combs, he said, voice firm. This wasn't testimony, it was confession, a bearing of a soul long silenced. Cruise's gaze drifted, as if peering into decades of buried fear. I thought pulling away ended it, he said. It never did. Anonymous packages kept coming, black towels embroidered with cleanse, bottles of bath oil matching. The basement scent, once a single rose submerged in murky water in a sealed jar, no note attached. I told no one, he confessed. Not my team, not my family. I kept them in a box, locked away. I still have them. Evidence of the shadow. Phone calls followed, blocked numbers, voices disguised, robotic, chilling. One burned in his memory. You may wear the mask of a church, Tom, but I know what's underneath. The courtroom tensed, jurors' eyes wide. I lived in paranoia, Cruise said. Was it real? Psychological? That's the game. Diddy doesn't threaten outright. He lingers in your shadow. In 2008, filming overseas, he entered his hotel suite, pristine, except for one detail. A black towel lay folded on the tub's edge. The concierge called it a mistake. Cruise knew better. This wasn't affection, not obsession, he told the court. It was ownership. He needed to remind me he still held part of me. He purged his life, tossed robes, candles, avoided water rituals, erasing pieces to feel free. But I wasn't, he whispered. Not until now. Cruise leaned forward, elbows on the stand, voice dropping to a low, deliberate rhythm. It wasn't just me, he said, eyes scanning the room. There were others, dozens, maybe more. He described Diddy's circle of control, gatherings not spontaneous but orchestrated, scripted. Guests surrendered phones, watches, handed NDAs on thick black paper, signed in silver ink, clauses vague, almost poetic. What enters water stays in silence. Rituals followed a pattern. Cleansing, silence, confession. In the tub, Icho whispered shame into the steam. Diddy listened, sometimes recorded, sometimes echoed it back. Shame was his currency, Cruise said. One night in 2006 stood out. He entered the ritual room, saw a comedian, among the biggest names, naked, kneeling, crying in the water, Diddy watching, unmoved. It wasn't sex, not pleasure. Exposure, power. We left hollower than when we arrived. Diddy weaponized. It calling weeks later, referencing confessions. Don't forget what you said in the steam. Or, I still have the tape if you want to talk bravely. Cruise stared at Diddy. You didn't offer a connection. You offered control. You bathed us in silence and called it unity. The aftermath lingered. Cruise described sleepless nights, replaying the basement, the incense, the whispers. He questioned his choices, why he went, why he stayed silent. I was a star, but I felt small, he said. He made us feel we belonged to something, then used it to bind us. The packages, the calls, the towel in the hotel, they were reminders, a leash. Scientology became his fortress, but even there doubt crept in. Did I escape, or just hide? He mused. The courtroom felt the depth, not just coercion, but a haunting, an invisible chain he'd worn for nearly 20 years. Speaking now, he said, voice steady, breaks that chain. I'm here for me, for others. To say what he built wasn't power. It was a cage. The courtroom sat in a thick, oppressive silence. Every breath held, every eye trained forward. No one dared move. Even Diddy, seated across the room, had gone still, his stare locked straight ahead, his expression a mask of stone, unreadable, impenetrable. TomCruise, positioned in the witness chair, was far from finished. He drew a slow, deliberate breath, his shoulders shifting as he adjusted his weight, the wood of the chair creaking faintly under him. When he spoke again, his voice carried a new edge, cold, sharp, no longer clouded by confusion or the haze of memory, but honed by a stark, chilling realization. The rituals, he said, his words slicing through the quiet, stopped being gatherings. They became assignments, demands dressed up as invitations. He began to unravel the tale, his tone measured but heavy. Months earlier, he'd tried to distance himself, to step back from Diddy's orbit, to reclaim his own space. But Diddy wouldn't let go so easily. He reached out, Cruise said, called it an invitation of honor, a special gesture to pull me back in. Cruise declined, firm in his resolve, but what followed shook him to his core, more than anything he'd encountered before. A box arrived at my door. Plain white, no label, no writing, just a single fingerprint, pressed in wax, dead center. On a card, and below it, a photograph. He paused, his jaw tightening, eyes flickering with the weight of the memory. It was me, asleep, taken from outside my bedroom window. The angle close, invasive, deliberate. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, a low wave of shock rolling through the crowd. The judge's gavel cracked down, a sharp demand for silence, but the air had already split open, tension sparking like lightning in a storm. That's when I knew. Cruise pressed on, his voice steady but laden with gravity. This wasn't a friendship that had soured. This was about punishment, about preservation of control. He acted swiftly, hired private security for the first time in his career, a necessity he'd never imagined needing. He moved homes, changed phone numbers, had his entire personal team subjected to rigorous background checks, sweeping for any breach, any leak. Yet the strange encounters refused to stop. I'd hear his name dropped at events I never expected. Galas, premieres, places he had no reason to be mentioned, Cruise said. Then there were the people, faces I recognized from those baths, nights, individuals I'd never seen in Hollywood circles before, suddenly appearing at press junkets, parties, even church fundraisers. They always knew my schedule, my movements, as if they'd been handed a map of my life. The most unsettling moment, he revealed, came in 2010, during a rap party for Mission Impossible, Ghost Protocol. He'd been in a private suite, moving through the crowd, thanking guests for their support. A waiter approached, handed him a drink, and leaned in close, his breath hot against Cruise's ear. "Diddy misses you," the man whispered. Cruise froze, his pulse hammering, and turned to face the stranger. But the waiter was gone, melted into the crowd. "I asked the staff who he was," Cruise said. "No one knew him. He wasn't on the payroll, wasn't hired for the event. He was just there." The harassment didn't relent. It stretched on, a shadow clinging to his every step, until he finally arranged a quiet deal through intermediaries, a fragile agreement to enforce distance. "They called it a truce," Cruise said, his eyes locking onto Diddy across the room. "I called it a warning, a signal I'd never be free." He leaned back slightly, the courtroom hanging on his every word. "You created a culture of silence," he told Diddy, his voice unwavering, "and I let it thrive too long." Cruise's tone dropped to a near whisper, forcing the room to lean in, straining to catch each syllable. "What scared me most," he said, "wasn't what happened to me. It was what I saw happening to others." His eyes darkened, shadowed by the weight of recollection. He described the pattern: young, talented, ambitious people, actors, musicians, influencers, pulled into the same web, the same script, the same basement rituals. "They weren't like me," he said. "I had protection, lawyers, resources, a network. They didn't. They had nothing but hope, and Diddy fed on that, consumed their dreams." He shared a story of a young actor, a rising star he'd taken under his wing during a studio mentoring program. "He was sharp, nervous, and reminded me of myself at that age," Cruise said. He'd introduced the kid to a few key contacts, offered advice, and tried to guide him through Hollywood's maze. Then one day, the actor vanished. Weeks later, Cruise learned he'd been spotted at one of Diddy's retreats. "When I finally heard from him, his voice was empty, like he'd been hollowed out," Cruise recounted. "He just said, 'Thanks for everything, Tom, but I'm good now. I see the path.'" He never acted again. It wasn't a lone case. Musicians, assistants, up-and-comers, they'd rise, then fade, turning to ghosts. Cruise's jaw clenched, his hands tightening on the chair. "That's when I started tracking it," he said. "I hired a former intelligence contractor, someone skilled at digging deep. We mapped connections, flights, party lists, NDAs. Every event Diddy hosted had a pattern, the same guests, the same disappearances. He'd submitted those logs to the court, a paper trail of evidence. Determined to act, Cruise contacted 3 major studios, anonymously at first, warning them of what he called the Bath Network. The response was cold. "They didn't want to hear it," he said. "One executive told me, 'You're not the first to bring this up, but you're the first crazy enough to take it to court.'" He turned, his gaze piercing the camera, broadcasting the testimony. "Well, I'm here now. Call me crazy, but this ends today." Silence gripped the room again, not from disbelief, but from a shared understanding. This wasn't a celebrity drama. This was the exposure of a system, a ritual, a predator hiding in plain sight behind the glare of fame. Cruise sat forward, his posture composed, his purpose clear. "There's one night I've never spoken of," he admitted. "Not to my advisors, my handlers, my church, because I was ashamed of how I handled it. It was early 2012, a private gathering at an estate in the hills of Mulholland, the guest list tightly controlled, no more than a dozen people. This wasn't one of Diddy's usual parties, the hedonistic sprawls," Cruise said. He called it a renewal night, a cleanse, a recommitment to some unspoken code. He'd thought he'd broken free, years removed from those circles, but an invitation arrived by hand, a white envelope, no return address, just an old photo of him and Diddy from 2005, a handwritten note scrawled across it. "You still owe me one last dip." Cruise ignored it, tried to push it aside, but on the day of the event, his driver received directions. His security team got clearance, as if every safeguard he'd built had been bypassed, overridden by some unseen hand. He arrived near midnight. The estate was shrouded in darkness, the only light a faint blue glow from within. Robes lay folded neatly on chairs, and at the room's heart stood a bath, vast, circular, like a relic from a Roman ruin. Silently, he was ushered in. Some faces were familiar, others new. He wouldn't name them. Diddy entered last, clad in white, wordless. Instead, he played a recording, a chilling montage of whispered confessions from past bath nights. "I heard my own voice," Cruise said. "My fears, my regrets, things I'd never uttered beyond those walls." One by one, others broke down, not from pain, but from the shock of hearing words they'd forgotten. He'd recorded us all. Diddy, he claimed, owned their truths. People stepped into the bath, silent, submissive. Cruise did not. "I walked out," he said, vowing never to return. "That night I understood. This wasn't a ritual. It was blackmail, disguised as a ceremony." He turned to the jury, eyes steady, locking with each juror in turn. The air grew thick, the tension a living thing, as the courtroom sensed the end nearing. Cruise's voice rose, firm, resolute. "Diddy doesn't collect people," he declared. "He collects obedience." He described a network, unofficial, undocumented but real, scattered across the industry. Assistants, stylists, trainers, background figures, people you'd never suspect. "They show up, vanish, always at the right time," he said. "Mention his name. They flinch. Question his moves. They deflect." He'd seen directors pushed off films, artists blacklisted, contracts quietly canceled. "He doesn't shout or threaten," Cruise said. "He just makes a call." One moment broke him. In 2017, on a film set, a crew member he'd known for years handed him a prop, scrawled in faded ink on the handle. "Still wet from the last bath," Cruise snapped. "I walked off set, went home, unlocked a storage unit I hadn't touched in a decade," he said. Inside were relics, gifts, towels, letters, every tie to Diddy. "I burned them all," he said, "but I kept one thing. The original NDA from the first bath ritual, signed in silver ink by me, by Diddy, by a third witness, name redacted." He'd submitted it to the court. The room stilled as the document flashed up, its ceremonial confidentiality clause glinting. Legal, spiritual, sinister. Cruise faced the jury. "This isn't about revenge," he said. "I'm not here to save a career. Silence isn't survival. It's surrender. And I'm done surrendering." The judge called a recess, but no one moved. On day 14 of the Diddy trial, TomCruise had detonated a truth, a bomb that would echo through Hollywood, shaking its foundations for decades. To come,